My name is Natalie, I'm 31 years old and currently a senior manager at a tech company in Seattle. My job demands absolute focus and a strong will, something I've been honing for over 10 years since graduating from college. I wasn't born into a wealthy family, but I grew up believing that if I wanted respect, I'd have to work twice as hard as everyone else. I spent sleepless nights studying in a tiny rental room just to win a full scholarship. I had to choose between buying textbooks or dinner. But in the end, all that effort earned me a solid position at an age when many are still trying to figure things out. At work, I'm the one my boss trusts with high-stakes projects. My colleagues respect my decisiveness and resilience. My team calls me Steel Natalie, not because I'm cold, but because I'm clear, fair, and never let emotions interfere with work. But beneath that tough shell, I know I'm still just a woman who wants to be loved, cared for, and have someone's hand to hold after a long, draining day. I'd had a few relationships in the past, but they all ended quickly. Partly because I was always busy, and partly because some men couldn't handle dating someone with higher income or status. One even told me to my face, "You make me feel like less of a man." I laughed it off. But that night, I sat in front of the mirror for a long time. I didn't know what I was doing wrong. Then one early spring evening, with the cold Seattle rain still falling, my close friend Ashley invited me to her husband's birthday party. I didn't want to go. I was exhausted from back-to-back meetings, and squeezing into a crowd of strangers had never been my thing. But Ashley begged, "Please, just an hour. You're my bridesmaid, don't say no like that." I reluctantly agreed. And that's where I met Ethan. He wasn't the kind of man who swept people off their feet at first sight. He didn't stand out, didn't talk much, and didn't try to impress. But his smile, gentle and genuine, put me strangely at ease. "You're Natalie, right?" he asked, approaching as I stood alone with a glass of wine, gazing into the distance. I nodded slightly. "How did you know?" "Ashley told me that if I saw a beautiful woman standing alone looking like she regrets showing up." "That's definitely you." I burst out laughing, for the first time in weeks. We talked the whole night. It felt effortless, honest, and straightforward. He worked in HR consulting, was my age, and had also been through a few failed relationships. We shared life perspectives, told each other random things, and eventually exchanged numbers. I didn't overthink it at the time, I just felt light. Then Ethan started reaching out. Morning texts, checking in after my long meetings, sending cute dog videos just because he knew I had a golden retriever when I was little. I began looking forward to his messages. And after 2 months of getting to know each other, he said he wanted something serious. I don't believe in fairy tales. But when Ethan said, "I don't care if you're more successful, make more money, or come home late from work, I just need to know if you're happy with me," my heart stirred in a very real way. I said yes. And a year later we got married. I thought happiness had finally found me. But I was wrong, so wrong. Our wedding was simple and warm, held in a small garden north of Seattle, where we had our first date under the drizzling March rain. It wasn't glamorous like the stuff of dreams, but to me, that moment was enough. Because the man standing beside me had held my hand through some of life's toughest days. Ethan's parents, Carl and Diane, surprised me at first with how open and kind they were. Diane gave me a hand-knit shawl, saying, "Just a little gift for a daughter-in-law who works in an office. It's easy to get chilly." Carl would joke around with Ethan in front of me, saying, "The boy's lucky to marry such a smart and strong woman." I laughed a lot at those family dinners. I even thought maybe I really did get lucky. After the wedding, Ethan moved into my 2-bedroom condo in the city, close to work, near a park, and just a 15-minute drive from my office. Married life felt peaceful in the beginning. We split house chores, cooked together on weekends, and every night before bed, Ethan would place a hand on my forehead and whisper, "Good night, my wife." Then one October evening, just after I returned from a client meeting in Portland, Ethan said, slowly, "There's something I want to talk to you about, my parents." I sat on the couch and slipped off my heels, my feet sore from the day. "What's going on?" "My parents' health hasn't been great. Dad has high blood pressure and Mom's getting forgetful. I'm really worried." I nodded. "Yeah, I get that. But we don't exactly live close." Ethan paused, then said something that made me freeze. I want us to move in with them, or at least convert their old house into a duplex. I looked up. You mean fully move in, or just live nearby? Make it a duplex. Their house is big, has a backyard and solid foundation. If we renovate, we'd have our own space and still be close enough to care for them. I already talked to a friend in construction. It'd cost around $100,000. I let out a breath, longer than I intended. It wasn't about being selfish. I understood children had responsibilities. But the thought of giving up our independent life to live right next door to my in-laws, even with a wall between us, made me uneasy. Ethan saw that. I know what you're thinking, but I promise, no one's expecting you to play the traditional daughter-in-law. My parents are easygoing. They really like you. I didn't respond right away. I asked for time to think, and for the next week I carried that question around like a small pebble in my shoe, barely noticeable but impossible to ignore. Finally, one Friday night after dinner with his parents, I said yes. Diane's eyes welled up. Thank you, Natalie. I know this isn't easy for you. I smiled, but something inside me tugged, soft and nameless. A few weeks later, Ethan and I started working with the construction team he knew. They designed 2 separate living spaces connected by a shared hallway with a lockable door. From the outside, it looked like a townhome. Inside, it was 2 different worlds. Ethan was excited, choosing tiles, wall colors, garden plans. I, on the other hand, started to feel like I was stepping into a project that I wasn't fully in control of. I was included in the conversations, but big decisions like taking out loans or selecting materials seemed to come more from him and his parents. One evening, while I was reviewing the detailed budget sheet, I asked, "Babe, so how are we splitting the $100,000 0 cents cost between both sides?" Ethan looked a little caught off guard. "What do you mean?" "I just want to know the breakdown. How much are we paying and how much are your parents paying?" Ethan was silent. A long, very long pause. Then he spoke softly. "I was hoping you could front the money for now. My parents are going through a bit of financial trouble." I sat upright. "Are you saying I'm covering everything?" He held my hand. "Not everything. Just helping for now. I'll pay you back over time." I didn't say anything more, but inside me a door quietly creaked open, and behind it wasn't light. I didn't yet realize that door would lead me to a truth. One that would shatter everything I believed about the word family. One weekend evening, when the renovation plans were nearly finalized and the workers had started laying the foundation, I decided to sit down with Ethan to go over the financials more clearly. Up to that point, I had fronted nearly all the initial costs: design fees, construction deposits, and material down payments. I'm not the type to nickel and dime, but I don't like being kept in the dark either. "Ethan, can you show me the total costs and the budget breakdown? I need to keep track of everything I'm paying." He looked at me and scratched his head. "Yeah, I'll check. But Natalie, there's something I should probably tell you first." I looked up, my heart slowing like I'd just stepped into a sudden draft of cold air. "My parents, they're actually in some debt," he said slowly. "It's not massive, but it's significant." "How much?" "About $140,000. I nearly dropped the glass in my hand. "Say that again," I said, trying to stay calm. $140,000? For what?" "Dad invested in a coffee shop chain a while ago, but it didn't work out. Then he took out another loan to pay off the old one. It just kept rolling over. And I'm only finding out about this when the house is almost built?" Then avoided my gaze. "I wasn't trying to hide it. I just thought I could handle it. But now it's all piling up. If we don't do something soon, they might lose the house." I was silent. A flood of numbers and what-ifs hit me all at once. I had already spent close to $85,000 0 cents on the renovation. And now this debt. I was in too deep. "What do you want me to do?" I asked, my voice dropping. Ethan took my hand. "I know this is a big ask, but can you help my parents? You're the only one who can save them right now." "And what about you?" "I'll pay you back, I promise." I gave a faint smile. Not because I was happy, but because in that moment I realized I wasn't just a wife. I was being treated like a financial solution. But I still loved Ethan, or I thought I did. And so, I said yes. I pulled $70,000 0 cents from my savings and transferred it to cover the bulk of his parents' debt. The rest I scheduled in monthly installments of $5 0 cents. Every payment documented with receipts and transaction records. Diane called me, crying as she thanked me. Carl even emailed me a handwritten letter, calling me a blessing this family is lucky to have. I used to believe that. But over time, little things began to feel off. Ethan stopped contributing financially. The "I'll pay you back" never happened. Every time I brought it up, there was an excuse. Delayed paycheck, funds tied up in a project. When I asked to see his pay stub to rework our budget, he snapped. "You don't trust me? Why does it always come back to money, Natalie?" I didn't answer. I was tired, but I kept paying. A year later, after I made the 13th payment, Diane called, cheerful. "You're amazing. Almost done in just a year. Honestly, if it weren't for you, we'd be out on the street." I asked, "How much is left now?" "Just around 25,000, sweetie. You really are this family's savior." I hung up, frozen. 13 months, and I had spent nearly $120,000, 0 cents. No contract, no legal paperwork, just trust. Then one night I came home early from work because a meeting got canceled and froze outside the living room door. Laughter spilled from inside, Carl's voice. "Gotta hand it to Ethan. He found himself a wife who not only brings in the money, but knows her place." Deanne chimed in. "The debt's nearly paid off, house is renovated, that girl's a diamond in the rough." Then Ethan, with a hint of sarcasm. "Yeah, but once it's all done, maybe I should cut her loose. Sooner or later she's gonna start asking questions." I don't know how long I stood there clutching my purse, heart pounding so loud I couldn't hear. But I knew one thing. This wasn't a life I was building. I was the target of a plan set in motion long before I ever said I do. From that night on, I was no longer the same Natalie who laughed over dinner, who believed in warm hugs and silent forgiveness. I didn't scream. I didn't confront. Instead, I turned quiet. Like a calm surface hiding a storm building deep below. I kept paying. On time, no reminders. $5,000, 0 cents a month from my savings and paycheck to cover the debt. On top of that, renovation bills kept trickling in like a cruel chorus on repeat. Tile invoices, painter fees, new window installations for the shared living area, all of it on me. Ethan's smile never changed. Every evening he'd ask what I wanted for dinner, occasionally hug me from behind while I was cooking, rest his chin on my shoulder and whisper, "Thank you, Natalie, I know you're doing so much for this family." I'd nod, but inside I felt nothing. I began digging into Ethan's finances. One Saturday afternoon, while he was watching football with Carl, I quietly opened my laptop and searched for any record of income he had ever shared with me, which, I suddenly realized, he never had. Since the day we got married, I had never once seen a real pay stub. The last time I asked about it, he put his coffee cup down and said, irritated, "Why do you think I'm hiding something? You already know I don't make much. Are you accusing me now?" I didn't tell him that I wasn't just suspicious. I knew something was wrong, but without proof I stayed silent. I kept contributing, kept covering everything. By that point I had poured more than $110,000, 0 cents, into the house and his family, nearly all the money I had saved over the last 6 years. And yet, strangely, Ethan always had money for other things. A new pair of limited edition sneakers. The latest smartphone just weeks after release. A weekend fishing trip with brand new gear. I didn't know where he was getting the money. But it wasn't from me. One time, I gently asked, "Could you be more transparent about our finances so we can manage things together? Because right now I'm covering everything." Ethan paused for a few seconds, then said, "You're doing it because you're good at it, not because I asked you to. If it feels like too much, then don't do it. I'm not forcing you." I gave a dry smile, the kind of smile only a woman who realizes she's being used can master. Not loud, not angry, just the smile of someone who's no longer naive. I didn't ask again after that. I also stopped sharing account numbers or balances, but I started documenting. Every debt payment, every material invoice, every bank transfer, every message Ethan sent asking me to help. Just one more time. I didn't know what I'd use it all for, but I knew one day I would. My in-laws still acted like they adored me, still called me the little angel of the family, still brought me their homemade apple pie on weekends as if I wasn't the one single-handedly carrying the debt they created. They didn't know I had overheard that conversation that night. They didn't know their words from "she earns money like water" to "once the house is done it'll be easy to cut her loose" echoed in my head every time I opened my wallet. Ethan still thought I believed in him, and I let him think so. Because I'd learned, a strong woman doesn't need to scream to prove her power. Sometimes silence is the foundation of a perfectly calculated counterstrike. I didn't know exactly when this would end, but I knew one thing. The next time I spent money, it wouldn't be to pay off debt. It would be to buy back my freedom. One rainy Wednesday afternoon, typical Seattle weather, I got out of a sudden meeting with Korean partners and headed home 3 hours earlier than expected. I thought I'd swing by my favorite bakery for some chestnut cookies, then head home and cook dinner for Ethan, something I hadn't done in a while because of work. As I turned into our street, I noticed Carl's silver SUV already parked in the garage. Odd, since it wasn't Sunday. They usually only visited on Sundays. I quietly opened the door, leaving the hallway light off. Raindrops dripped from my hair, but I didn't notice. Laughter and voices floated in from the living room. "That girl really is a gold mine, Ethan." Diane's voice rang out, sharp like shattered glass. "Remember the first time I met Natalie? I couldn't believe she was the kind of woman who'd be so easy to reel in." Carl chuckled. Then Ethan chimed in. "It's simple. Just act like you care, say a few sweet things. Women like her, tough on the outside but always craving love deep down, am I right?" "Totally," a woman's unfamiliar voice added. "I'm still shocked she bought into it so easily. This house is practically hers now, most of the debt's paid. Just stretch it out a few more months and done." I froze. The air thickened, like someone had filled every crack with glue. I didn't know how long I stood there, just that my hand was gripping my bag so tight my knuckles went white. Then I did the first thing that came to mind. I turned around and walked out as if I'd never come home. That night I texted Ethan saying I had to stay at a hotel due to visiting international clients. He replied with one line, "Stay safe, love you." I stared at the message, didn't reply. Inside everything shattered, but from those shards I began piecing together a plan. I didn't cry, didn't rage, didn't explode like some drama scene. I hit record. The next time I came home, I brought a tiny recorder tucked into my coat pocket. I acted tired, buried in work, as if I didn't notice that night's dinner included a new woman, introduced as a business associate. I smiled, poured wine, made small talk, but inside I was capturing every glance, every fake smile. I also quietly compiled a complete breakdown of our financial history, every dollar I had spent over 2 years of marriage, renovation, debt payments, living expenses, all of it logged in a confidential file. I sent a copy to my attorney with a note, "Do nothing, just keep this." Then I began the process of transferring the house into my name. Initially, for the sake of transparency, I had suggested we be co-owners, but now I had someone handle the transfer of Ethan's share to me under the pretense of property tax optimization. He signed without a second thought. And then, a week later, I pretended to be the old Natalie again, the tired wife, still cooking, still asking about his day, still loving. Meanwhile, I was counting down to the perfect reveal. They had no idea I'd quietly filed for divorce. No idea I had purchased the remaining debt under special terms, making me their new creditor. No idea that the soft-hearted girl they planned to discard now held every card. And when the time came to expose the truth, I wouldn't yell. I'd simply open the door and invite them out of my life, one by one. Not with bitterness, but with proof born from their own lies. I used to think I was a rational woman. Smart, grounded, immune to emotional damage. But when your heart is manipulated so subtly, you learn. The deepest wounds aren't caused by blunt force. They come from small cuts, repeated quietly, every single day. I kept playing my role, the devoted wife, the ideal daughter-in-law. I kept smiling when Ethan hugged me from behind, kept nodding when my mother-in-law called me the family's pride. I even increased the monthly payments to pay off their debt faster, just so they'd believe I still trusted them. They didn't realize those were the last dollars I would ever give them, not out of love, but out of contempt, carefully wrapped in calm. In the 18th month of my steady payments, I called the bank holding most of Carl and Diane's debt. As the original guarantor, I offered to settle the remaining balance in one lump sum, in exchange for full assignment of the debt to my name. It didn't take long, they happily agreed. From that moment on, I, Natalie Parker, was officially the holder of my in-laws' debt note. 1 week later, I completed the paperwork to transfer full ownership of the renovated house, where the whole family now lived, into my name. Ethan didn't question anything when I told him it was for new state tax processing. He signed the documents with a half smile and a distracted look in his eyes. I remember that moment so clearly. Only one sentence echoed in my mind. "Thank you, Ethan, you just handed me the key to end all of this." I quietly began working with my personal attorney, filing for divorce in King County, with every detail kept strictly confidential. During that time, I gathered all the necessary evidence: bank statements, receipts, emails, and especially the audio recording from the night I accidentally overheard their discard her plan. My lawyer, Claudia Weston, a sharp and composed woman in her 50s, looked at me after our first meeting and said, "If I were you, I wouldn't get angry. I'd wait, and when everything's ready, I'd press the button. Right time, right target." I responded only with a thin, emotionless smile. The night before everything was revealed, I cooked as usual: Ethan's favorite lasagna, a salad for my mother-in-law, and lemon butter cake for Carl. I even poured the wine and raised a toast to finally, almost being done with the debt. Ethan beamed, eyes shining. "I can't believe you pulled this off, Natalie, really. You're the best thing that's ever happened to me." I lightly tapped his glass, looked at him deeply. "I think so too, Ethan. Thank you for showing me your true self so early on." He didn't understand what I meant, but I did. And I didn't rush to explain. The next morning, I woke up early and left the divorce papers on the kitchen counter, along with a copy of the official debt transfer naming me as the new creditor of Carl and Diane, and a short note: "Good luck negotiating with your new lender. I have no intention of being generous." I walked out of that house and moved into a small penthouse apartment I had secretly purchased using profits from a private investment I'd been nurturing for the past 3 years. The place overlooked Elliott Bay, where the sunrise reflected on the water every morning, a reminder that peace isn't something granted, but something you take back with your own hands. That afternoon, my attorney sent formal notices to Ethan and his parents. They had 3 choices: repay the remaining debt in full within 60 days, vacate the house immediately, granting me full control, face legal action for failure to comply. I didn't stick around to see their reaction, because I already knew some relationships aren't worth saving, and letting go at the right time is far better than letting trust rot into something irreparable. And the only thing I regretted was not realizing sooner that sometimes forgiveness isn't noble, it's just weakness in a moral disguise. I thought I'd made the clean break, that I had the upper hand when I left the divorce papers and walked away from that house in silence. But I forgot one thing: people who survive off others will always fight back in the ugliest ways when they feel threatened. Just 3 days after the divorce paperwork was submitted, Ethan texted, asking to meet and talk things out. I declined. I told him all communication should go through legal channels. He didn't reply. I thought that was the end of it. But that Saturday morning, as I was getting ready for an investment seminar downtown, I got a call from my property manager, Mr. Wallace. His voice was urgent. "Natalie, I'm sorry to bother you this early. Someone just changed the locks at the Lakeview property and claimed you no longer own it. I just got a call saying a woman has moved in with Ethan." I froze. Without waiting another second, I drove straight to the old house, the house I renovated with my own money, hand-picked every tile and chandelier. The gate had a new lock, but I had a spare key from the original set, and I had already filed the ownership transfer documents with every local authority the moment they were finalized. I rang the bell. The one who opened the door was Ethan, wearing the white dress shirt I gave him for his birthday 2 years ago, but this time, he didn't greet me barefoot at the door like he used to. He stood in the doorway, calm and steady. "Natalie, I think it's better if you go back to your new apartment. This isn't your house anymore." I looked at him and said nothing. Behind him, I saw a young woman with loosely curled blonde hair walk out of the kitchen holding a glass of orange juice. She smiled like I was some uninvited guest. "That's my new girlfriend," Ethan said, like he was announcing a new pair of shoes. I stayed silent. "Oh, and one more thing," he added. "My parents think you could still live here if you agree to a few conditions." I raised an eyebrow. "Conditions?" Yeah, you can stay here, but you'll need to pay rent, and since the house is more crowded now, it'd be great if you could handle cleaning, laundry, and cooking. I laughed. A long, unrestrained laugh. Ethan took a half step back, probably caught off guard. You're telling me I have to pay rent and do chores in a house that's legally mine? Ethan shrugged. Well, you kind of moved out, I just rearranged things a little. I pulled my phone from my pocket and quickly dialed a familiar number. Hi Claudia, it's me, I said when the line connected. Get ready to file for trespassing, unlawful occupancy, and violation of property ownership. Yes, the entire ex-in-law family starting today. I looked Ethan dead in the eyes. No softness left. You have 3 hours to pack up and leave my house, with your girlfriend and your parents. If not, the police will be here before lunch. His face went pale. You can't do this. Natalie, we were married. Were, I emphasized, and you ended that. I'm sorry, but didn't you say you still loved me? You once told me. I've said a lot of things, I cut in. But I never said I was stupid. I turned and walked toward the gate, feeling lighter than I had in 2 years, as if I had just set down a 100-pound weight. Ethan didn't follow me. He knew it was over. And I knew this wasn't revenge. This was justice. And in a world where women like me are labeled too strong to be loved, this wasn't just a statement to Ethan, but to everyone who ever thought independence was there to be exploited. 3 days after that confrontation at the old house, my lawyer personally sent a formal demand letter to Ethan and his family, clearly stating 3 points. The Lakeview property was legally under my name, fully registered with King County's property records. They were unlawfully occupying it, and if they did not vacate within 7 days, I would file a civil suit for eviction. The remaining debt, over $60,000, hadn't been paid off, only deferred due to bank negotiations. From this point forward, Carl and Diane were fully liable, as they were the original borrowers. Claudia attached all necessary documentation, bank statements, financial guarantees, the debt transfer contract, and supporting evidence. Every detail was covered. That afternoon, Ethan called me 5 times. I didn't answer. He texted. I know you're angry, but we can work this out without turning it into a war. I replied with just one line. Let your lawyer talk to mine. I also proceeded to file a civil suit against Ethan and his girlfriend, the blonde woman I saw in my kitchen that day, for adultery and breach of marital ethics. In Washington, while adultery doesn't directly affect divorce rulings, if there's financial harm and evidence, the guilty party can still be held accountable under civil law, alimony included. I had everything: recordings, photos, texts, and even a statement from a delivery worker who had seen her coming and going while I was away. Claudia filed a compensation claim for $75,000, including emotional distress, personal property damages, and legal expenses. But it didn't stop there. I also filed to recover the $60,000 I had fronted during the renovation and debt repayments, complete with transfer receipts and a handwritten IOU Ethan had begged me to sign when he first asked for help. They were cornered. What used to be a loosely held facade had now become a complete picture, one painted in betrayal and covered in fake smiles. Ethan finally showed up at the first mediation. Gone was his smug confidence. He looked exhausted, face drawn and tense. He looked at me and quietly said, I know I messed up, but Natalie, if you push this, I'll lose everything. I replied coolly. You bet everything. The moment you betrayed me, losing it wasn't my doing, it was yours. His girlfriend didn't show up for the hearing, but through her lawyer she sent a settlement offer, willing to pay part of the damages if her name remained confidential in court. I accepted, not because I forgave her, but because I knew the sharpest blow doesn't come from shouting, it comes in silence. And I wasn't done playing my endgame. As for my ex-in-laws, after receiving the demand letter, they called me in tears, pleading, painting themselves as victims. Carl choked out, Natalie, you were once our daughter-in-law. Do you really want to destroy this family? I cut him off, my voice steady. I'm not destroying anything. Your family just assumed I didn't know how to fight back. Now I'm simply taking what's rightfully mine. They fell silent. I knew with people like them, those who never admit fault, loss is the only lesson that ever sticks. But I wasn't waiting for them to change. I didn't need them to. My life had already moved to a new chapter, one where I held the wheel, and no one could grab it from me again. Ethan and everyone on his side had become nothing more than side characters in a story I had already cleared from my shelves. I never thought I'd one day sign papers to sell the house that was once my home, the place I poured so much time, money, and emotion into. But I finally understood. No matter how beautiful a house may be, it's just four walls if all it holds is lies and manipulation. The Lakeview property was reappraised after renovations, and with the real estate market booming, I received an offer just 1 month after listing. A young couple offered $200,000, 0 cents, exactly what I'd hoped for. They loved the dual-space layout, especially the kitchen I had redesigned from scratch. After deducting all the renovation and personal investment costs, I walked away with a net profit of over $40,000, 0 cents. Not a huge amount considering the time and pain it cost me, but more than enough to mark a fresh start, one free from old memories. During divorce mediation, the court approved my claim for alimony compensation. Ethan was ordered to pay $35,000, 0 cents over 12 months. The girlfriend, despite trying to downplay her role, had to pay $15, 0 cents, to avoid being publicly named in court. Carl's family, facing legal pressure, repaid the $60,000, 0 cents I had fronted, not out of goodwill, but to avoid being sued for breach of signed financial agreements. All in all, I recovered over $150,000, 0 cents, between the house sale and settlements, but the most valuable thing I gained wasn't in dollars. After the storm, I started taking investing seriously. I used to think saving was enough. Now I know. Modern women need more than just stable income. We need sharp financial minds. I enrolled in a personal wealth management course, hired an independent advisor, and learned to read markets not with emotion, but with data. Slowly, the pain lost its grip on me. I realized I could shape a better future. On my own. Without a crutch. Without needing love to feel whole. One autumn afternoon, I stood on the balcony of my new apartment, overlooking the Seattle waterfront, the sunset spilling golden honey across the sky, and it hit me. I was living the life the old Natalie once dreamed of, but never believed she deserved. I no longer kept in touch with Ethan. I didn't care whether he and that woman were still together. That wasn't my story anymore. I had closed that book, not torn it up, not denied it, but left it exactly where it belonged, the past. My parents, who once didn't understand why I chose someone like Ethan, are now closer to me than ever. They never said you were right, but the look in my mother's eyes when she visited my new place said enough. My father, always the quiet type, just patted my shoulder and said, "You're stronger than I ever imagined." I smiled. I didn't need the words. I already knew I wasn't the same Natalie anymore. I am Natalie, the woman once seen as easy to use because she loved too hard. But now, I love myself more than anyone else ever could. I haven't shut the world out, but I do choose carefully who I let in. Not out of fear, but because I've learned, not everyone who gets close is there to lift you up. Some are just there to take what they can. And if you ask me whether I regret loving Ethan, I'll say no. Because without him, I wouldn't have learned where my limits are. I wouldn't have known how far I could go once I let go. And most importantly, I would never have discovered that sometimes the thing we most need to let go of is the very thing we once thought we couldn't live without. But I've lived. And I'm living better than ever. Natalie's story is powerful proof that love doesn't always return loyalty, but learning to love wisely, and especially to love yourself, is what matters most. After the pain, she not only reclaimed justice but emerged smarter, stronger, and more grounded. She refused to let heartbreak define her and instead used it to build a life she finally deserves. A reminder for all of us, letting go at the right moment is the first step to true freedom. What do you think of Natalie's journey? Did she make the right choice by standing up for her worth? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to follow the channel for more heartfelt family stories. My name is Jaden, and maybe if you just looked from the outside, you'd think I was the kind of person who had always lived in luxury. The truth is, I grew up in a massive house perched on a hill in the suburbs of Seattle. A classic-style mansion over 18,000 square feet, complete with a hanging garden and a private pond, worth more than $60 million. But what made that place priceless had nothing to do with numbers. My father, Daniel Brooks, was a master architect who not only designed landmark buildings for major corporations, but also spent 15 years of his life building that house. Every stone, every beam was tied to his dream and dedication. None of us ever called it a mansion. To my dad, it was a home built on values. He used to say, "A real home isn't built with money, but with the character of those who live in it." My mother, Helen, was a finance lecturer at a community college. She didn't wear designer clothes or carry expensive handbags, but just listen to her lecture and you'd understand why my father loved her so much. She could turn complex concepts about investing, saving, and budgeting into inspiring stories. And she applied those lessons to our family life with unwavering discipline. I still remember when I was 8 and asked my mom for a gaming console because all my friends had one. She just smiled and asked, "Would you like to learn how to buy it yourself with your own money?" So I started doing chores, folding laundry, mowing the lawn, even helping organize my parents' mini library. It took nearly 4 months to save up enough. When I finally brought home the console, my mom said, "You didn't just buy something, you learned the real value of money." Even though my family had enormous wealth, my parents chose to send me to the local public school, where my friends had no idea about the kind of numbers my parents dealt with every day. I took the bus to school, ate sandwiches my mom packed, and never wore flashy jewelry. One time when I was invited to a friend's house, my mom reminded me, "Jaden, don't talk about our home unless someone asks. Let who you are be what people remember, not where you live." I learned to live simply in a world where people assumed I had everything. But the truth was, I was taught that the most valuable asset isn't a big house or a bank balance. It's how I treat others, how I face challenges, and the honesty behind every decision. My dad once took me to the top floor of our house, a study lined with walnut wood and windows overlooking the entire city. He stood there, arms crossed, looked at me and said, "Jaden, one day this house will be yours. But remember, that doesn't mean you belong to wealth. Let your value come from what you do, not what you inherit." I was too young to fully understand his words back then, but looking back, every word feels etched into the bricks of my mind. That house wasn't just a roof over my head. It was a quiet reminder that nothing is stronger than ethics and integrity, especially in a world where greed constantly knocks on the door. I grew up with that mindset, carrying with me a quiet world many never see. But I never forgot what my father taught. Wealth without understanding only leads to loss. And I believed that, until the person I loved most shattered everything I held sacred. I used to think that living humbly in a wealthy family was the best way to avoid judgment, but it turns out, sometimes silence itself invites people to make up stories about you. When I was 12, something happened that completely changed how I saw friendship and financial boundaries. I was in 7th grade at Rockridge Middle School, a modest school full of color and character. I had a close group of 3 friends, Chloe, Natalie, and Madison. Natalie was the most outgoing, always laughing, always talking, and the first to ask, "Jaden, is it true your house has an elevator? A private movie theater too?" I gave a half smile and didn't answer. I didn't want my friends to see me as different. I loved our lunch breaks with cookies in the cafeteria, our silly games on the field, and I truly believed what we had was genuine. Then Chloe's gaming console broke. It was a new console her dad had gifted her for her birthday, and she had proudly brought it to school. During recess, she handed it to me to try. I still remember the cold sensation in my palm when it slipped and hit the cement floor with a sharp crack. The screen went black. Chloe stared at me, not crying, but her lips trembled. I immediately apologized and said I'd find a way to fix or replace it. That evening I told my mom. She looked at me for a long moment, then gently said, "Jaden, you can apologize, you can find a repair shop, but you can't use family money to fix mistakes that weren't made with bad intentions. You'll have to take responsibility through your own effort." It took me 2 weeks of doing odd jobs and saving up before I brought the console to a repair shop near school. But when I returned it to Chloe, she didn't smile. Natalie, standing next to her, chimed in. "For someone rich like him, a few $100 is nothing. Are you even sure that's your console, Chloe?" I froze. That cold feeling returned. The next day, rumors started spreading that I'd broken it on purpose to replace it with a cheaper one. That I stole Chloe's console and swapped it out. Madison didn't say anything, but the way she avoided my eyes said enough. The vice principal heard about it when a group of students submitted a complaint, something I later learned Natalie orchestrated. My dad took time off work to come to school. During the meeting with the principal, he sat silently through all the accusations, then calmly pulled out warranty documents, the repair receipt, and a confirmation letter from the repair shop. He simply said, "I taught my son that the truth doesn't need to shout, it just needs to stand firm." I was cleared. Natalie and Chloe were reprimanded for spreading false information, but what I'll never forget wasn't their punishment. It was what my father whispered to me as we walked out of the school office. "Jaden, some people will only see your wallet, never your heart. Don't let those people define your worth." After that, I distanced myself from that friend group. I no longer shared much about my personal life. I learned how to politely decline when someone asked me to lend them money for lunch or hinted at me picking up the tab. I wasn't cold, just more careful. One time, Natalie bumped into me outside a grocery store and scoffed, "Still shopping at discount stores? I thought you only ate at five-star restaurants." I just nodded. Because by then I understood one thing clearly. You don't need to explain yourself to people who've already chosen not to believe in you. Years later, I still keep that old gaming console, scratched, worn out, and no longer working, but to me it's a reminder of the value of saying no, of the first wounds trust can leave, and of how I learned that sometimes true wealth is the ability to stand alone without losing yourself. I met Jack when I was 35 at a finance seminar in Denver, where I was invited as a guest speaker on digital banking security. He was one of the attendees, sitting in the third row, and the only one bold enough to ask a challenging question after my presentation. Is there a line between the convenience of technology and the cost of personal privacy? That question didn't throw me off, it intrigued me. He wasn't asking to show off, he was asking to understand. After the seminar, we talked for a bit in the coffee area, and I realized Jack was the straightforward, cheerful type with a unique way of thinking. He worked in digital marketing, not wildly successful but clearly passionate. And more importantly, he had no idea who I was beyond that day's talk. Something that felt like a relief. We kept in touch. The first texts were about work, which slowly turned into late-night calls, weekend coffees, then short getaways just to escape the inbox. Jack had a kind of energy that made life feel lighter. He wasn't fazed by my title, never asked about my assets, and wasn't curious about my family. Once I jokingly asked, "Aren't you going to Google me?" Jack just shrugged, "I'd rather learn about you from you." After 2 years of dating, we had a small wedding by Lake Tahoe with just family and a few close friends. My mom sat next to me while I got my makeup done and whispered, "Your dad would be smiling if he saw you today." I believed that too. If he were still alive, I think he would have liked Jack. At least at first. After the wedding, Jack moved in with me into the high-rise apartment my parents had bought for me downtown. A month later, I decided it was time to show Jack more about the home in the western hills of Seattle, the one I grew up in. I hadn't brought anyone there since my dad passed away 3 years earlier. Partly because I wasn't ready, partly because I was afraid someone would see it as a trophy. That visit happened on a sunny Saturday afternoon. When the automatic gate opened, Jack fell silent. He stepped out of the car slowly, like he was walking into another world. The slate roof, the tall windows catching the sunlight through the blazing red maple trees, the pond still shimmering like the summers of my childhood. I watched his eyes as he entered the grand hallway lined with the familiar walnut paneling and the architectural details my father once sketched by hand. "Jaden? You lived here?" His voice was hoarse. I nodded. "I grew up here." He gave a small laugh like he still couldn't believe it, but I noticed something flicker in his eyes. A curiosity I hadn't seen before. After that day, he started asking more questions. At first they seemed casual. How long did your dad take to build this? Who manages the garden? Has the house ever been reappraised? But gradually he mentioned more specific terms. Personal assets, inheritance, deed ownership, and decision rights. I couldn't deny that something inside me began to feel cautious. I didn't want to think poorly of Jack, the man I chose to marry, but I also couldn't forget my father's lessons. The one who truly loves you will respect your boundaries even when you don't explain them. A few weeks later, during dinner at our apartment as I was pouring wine, Jack suddenly asked, "Jaden, if something ever happened to your mom, who would get ownership of the house in the Western Hills?" I froze, the glass in my hand trembling slightly. Looking him in the eye, I said, "That's a family matter, Jack, and I think you understand that." He smiled, but it wasn't the warm smile I was used to. For the first time since we met, I felt a small, thread-thin but razor-sharp distance forming between two people who once promised no secrets, and I began to wonder, was there something inside him I'd overlooked? Just because I'd trusted too soon? The message from my mom came on a Monday morning just as I was about to join a virtual meeting with a bank executive. The message was only a few words. Jaden, your father needs you. I left the office within 10 minutes. On the way to the hospital, my mind was spinning with speculation. My father had always been healthy. Every morning he walked for an hour around the backyard garden, ate well, and never skipped his routine checkups. But when I walked into the hospital room and saw him lying there with a gaunt face, I knew things were no longer simple. He smiled when he saw me, but the eyes that once held unshakable resolve were now shadowed with exhaustion. I sat beside him, held his hand, and listened as my mother whispered, "The doctor said it's stage 4 pancreatic cancer. Surgery's no longer an option, Jaden." I don't remember exactly how I reacted. All I know is the world seemed to collapse into a single heavy ringing in my ears. I had always believed my father was unbreakable, that he would be there for every milestone in my life, but now I had to prepare to lose him. From that day on, I paused all major work commitments and rearranged my schedule to spend more time at the hospital. I read books to him, shared stories from work, and sometimes played the jazz music he used to love. In those moments, I almost forgot about the reality waiting outside. Jack at first seemed supportive. He occasionally brought snacks, asked how things were going, and picked me up late at night, but just a few weeks in, his patience started to wear thin. One night, when I came home exhausted after a long day at the hospital, Jack was standing at the door, arms crossed, his usual warmth gone. "Jaden, how long are you planning to keep this up?" I frowned. "What do you mean?" I understand you love your parents, but our life also needs attention. You're gone all the time. I feel like I'm alone in this marriage." I stood in silence. I was too drained to argue, but inside something cracked. Was this really the man who once promised to stand by me through everything? A few weeks later, my father passed away on a quiet morning. My mother and I sat by his side, his hand holding mine until the very end. I didn't cry. I just sat there, listening to the monitor go silent, and felt a part of my heart leave with him. The funeral was held in our family's garden, simple and dignified, just as he had wanted. Throughout the ceremony, Jack was there, polite but distant. He avoided my gaze and barely acknowledged the grief I was carrying. After the funeral, my mother handed me a thick file. Inside was a carefully prepared will. My father had left me full ownership of the hillside mansion, the place he once called the heart of the family. The house was valued at nearly $5,500,000, but to me, it was priceless. Jack heard the news from a relative at the funeral, and his attitude shifted instantly. That night over dinner, he suddenly asked, "So, what are you planning to do with that house?" I looked at him, a sense of caution rising in me. "I haven't thought about it yet. Everything's still too fresh." He nodded, then added, "I was just thinking, if both of us were on the title, it might make things easier later. Legally, I mean." I didn't respond, but my heart tightened. For the first time, I felt Jack was looking at my father's legacy not as a family heirloom, but as a prize to be claimed. A few days later, I got a call from the family attorney. Mr. Peterson, my father's longtime friend. He confirmed that all the transfer documents were finalized and I was the sole legal owner of the house. I stood on the second-floor balcony of the mansion that windy afternoon, looking out at the garden my father once tended with his own hands, and I silently promised him I would protect this place no matter what. But I never imagined that the first person I'd have to protect it from would be the man sleeping next to me each night. 6 weeks after my father's passing, the atmosphere in our shared apartment had grown increasingly tense. Jack could no longer hide his restlessness. He started asking non-stop questions about the legalities of the house I had just inherited, and even though I gave clear answers repeatedly, he kept circling back to the same topic. One evening, as I was looking through my father's old keepsakes in the study, Jack showed up at the door with a more serious expression than usual. He handed me a stack of papers, placed them on the desk, and said casually, "I just met with a lawyer named Jerry Peterson. He knows a lot about inheritance laws in Washington. I think we should co-own the house to avoid future complications." I stared at him. "Jack, what are you saying? Why would the ownership need to be changed?" He shrugged, trying to seem harmless. We're married, Jaden. What's yours is mine, right? It's just a formality. I sat up straight, my heartbeat quickening. No, that house is a personal inheritance directly from my father, and you know that. He stayed quiet for a few seconds, then smiled, but the warmth was gone from his eyes. Well then, I guess you won't be surprised to hear I already did it. I froze. You did what? Jack pulled out his phone, opened an email, and slid it toward me. It was a scanned copy of a property transfer form, stamped, pending review. My name, Jaden Brooks, had been crossed out in red ink, replaced with Jack E. Nolan. I was stunned. What the hell did you do? Jerry said I could process the paperwork as a spouse if I could prove vested interest. And guess what? I already paid him $300,000 up front. I shot to my feet, my voice trembling. You tried to transfer a property in my name without my consent? Are you insane? I did what had to be done. If you won't share, I have to protect myself. We can live like roommates if that's more comfortable for you. Otherwise, I think divorce is a reasonable option. Every word hit like a cold blade. The man I once thought would hold my hand through life now stood before me like a stranger, calculating and cold. I took a step back, struggling to stay calm. Jack, what you've done isn't just illegal, it's betrayal. You took advantage of me, and the trust I gave you. He crossed his arms, smirking. Trust? What trust? You hid your family's entire wealth from me. I married someone who never shared anything truly important. I stood frozen, my heart pounding. But instead of arguing, I walked out of the room. I needed proof. I needed to know if what he said was just a bluff. And when I called my father's lawyer, the real Mr. Peterson, not this so-called Jerry, I learned things were worse than I thought. Mr. Peterson sighed after hearing my story. Jaden, there's no licensed attorney named Jerry Peterson in this state. You've been scammed. And if Jack paid that person, he may have fallen victim to a legal fraud. It felt like the air was sucked out of my lungs. Jack hadn't just tried to steal my inheritance. He'd also been gullible enough to lose a fortune in the process. But the deepest hurt didn't come from the financial loss. It came from realizing I had loved and trusted someone completely unworthy. That night I came home to find Jack sitting at the dining table, his face pale. Jerry's not answering his phone. I think I've been scammed. I didn't yell. I didn't curse. I simply placed the original property documents that Mr. Peterson had just sent on the table, along with a copy confirming I was the sole legal owner of the house. You've crossed a line, Jack, and I have no reason to stay with you anymore. He opened his mouth to speak, but I raised my hand to stop him. There's no explanation that can fix the trust you destroyed. I walked out of the room, quietly. But inside, a door had closed for good. And I knew, from that moment on, Jack was no longer part of my journey. 3 days after that final confrontation, I officially moved out of the apartment Jack and I had once shared. I took nothing but a suitcase of clothes and a wooden box holding the letters my father had written. Everything else, the memories, the dreams, and the promises, I left behind like someone letting go of a stone sinking to the bottom of a lake. I moved back to the hillside mansion, once the home of my childhood, now the only peaceful place I had left. I thought that after I exposed the truth and cut ties, Jack would quietly disappear from my life. But I had underestimated the greed and delusion still lingering inside him. That morning, while I was walking with my mother in the backyard garden, the gate buzzer rang non-stop. On the security screen, I saw Jack standing outside, hands on his hips, his face flushed. Either from anger or embarrassment, I couldn't tell. I picked up my phone and connected to the intercom system. Jack, what are you doing here? He looked straight into the camera, his voice loud and firm. Jaden, I have a right to enter this house. You're holding it unlawfully. We need to talk. I responded calmly. I'm the legal owner. If you don't leave, I'll call the police. As if he had anticipated my reaction, Jack pulled a stack of papers from his coat pocket. I had a new lawyer go over everything. You think you're smart, but I'm not naive anymore. I didn't say another word. I immediately called the security team. Less than 5 minutes later, 2 security officers arrived and asked Jack to leave the premises. He resisted, yelling that he was the victim, that he'd been tricked, that I had no heart. But I didn't go outside. I just stood behind the glass door watching him scream at the sky while the men who once worked for my father stayed silent and did their jobs. That afternoon I met with my lawyer at the office to finalize something important. A restraining order. I no longer wanted to live with the fear that Jack might show up at my door, switching between begging and threatening. Just as we were about to finish, my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number appeared. Jack was scammed out of $360,000. Jerry is a fake name, not licensed in any state. The message came from an old acquaintance in the legal field who had once worked with Jack on a marketing project. He knew Jack was spiraling, having lost his money, his reputation, and his marriage. It turned out that the lawyer Jerry Jack had blindly trusted was actually a professional con artist. He had been investigated multiple times for impersonating legal professionals and scamming the gullible. Jack had wired him a massive amount, $360,000, to speed up the transfer of ownership, only to receive a series of forged documents, so well crafted they nearly fooled me too. I should have felt vindicated, but in truth I just felt empty. Jack had thrown himself into the abyss and no one could pull him out but himself. That evening I sat alone in my father's old library, the soft light glowing across the polished wooden desk. I opened a drawer and took out the letter my father had written to me before he passed, a familiar, steady handwriting that calmed me just by looking at it. My dear Jaden, if one day you find your trust betrayed, remember, trust is the most precious thing we build. It takes time to create but can vanish with a single lie. Don't mourn what was lost, because losing what's unworthy is sometimes the only way to keep yourself. I folded the letter and took a deep breath. I knew I had crossed into a new chapter of life, without Jack, without the dreams others once tried to exploit. And if my father had left me anything more valuable than the hilltop estate, it was the strength I held in that moment. Outside, the breeze whispered through the maple trees. I could hear my mother laughing with the gardener. Life was moving on, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was truly in control. Not just of the house, but of my heart. The divorce proceedings moved faster than I expected, perhaps because Jack no longer had the strength to fight. He had no lawyer, no money, and most importantly, no trust left from me. We signed the papers at a small office in downtown Seattle, a place where no one knew my name or my past. So different from the sunny, laughter-filled wedding by Lake Tahoe just 2 years before. Jack didn't say much during the signing. He just kept his head down, dark circles under his eyes, his hands trembling slightly. When the final stamp hit the paperwork, I stood up first. I hope you find your way back to yourself. That was all I could say without letting my heart lose direction again. I returned to the estate and extended its familiar calm by transforming my father's old room into a space for meditation and reading. My mother, after staying with me for some time, began focusing on herself, taking art classes, gardening, walking every morning. The house, once wrapped in grief, was slowly breathing again. Then came the day of my father's first memorial. We kept it simple, just a few close friends, some longtime colleagues and neighbors who had known our family since I was a child. Everything was thoughtfully prepared, from the small altar in the library to the white flowers lining the walkway. The setting was solemn but still warm. As the ceremony began, I noticed a familiar figure outside the iron gate. His eyes met mine through the security camera. I froze for a few seconds. Jack. He looked thinner than the last time I saw him. His shirt was wrinkled, his hair slightly messy, and his eyes sunken. He placed a hand on his chest when he saw me watching, as if silently pleading. I stepped onto the porch but kept my distance. "Why are you here, Jack?" He swallowed hard. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry. To you. And to him. I know I don't deserve to be here, but I need you to know I've lost everything." I looked at him, trying to keep my voice steady. "You had the chance to hold on to at least one thing, but you chose to give it all up for greed. I was duped. I was stupid. I get that now." The sound of chanting began inside. The guests had all gathered. I took a deep breath, then spoke firmly. "Today is for my father. This isn't your stage for redemption. If you still have any respect for me or for him, please leave." Jack nodded, but didn't move. He took a few steps back, eyes full of one last silent plea. "I'm not asking for forgiveness, just don't hate me." I stayed silent, not because I hated him, but because I had nothing left in me to feel. I signaled to the security guards. They understood, stepped out quietly without making a scene. One of them spoke softly to Jack and escorted him away from the gate area. I didn't look back. I returned inside where everyone was waiting, where my father's photo sat on the table, surrounded by white flowers and glowing candles. The ceremony went on. No one mentioned Jack's appearance as if he'd never crossed that gate. But inside me, something closed for good. Not the relationship, just the last fragments of regret. That night I sat alone in the tea room my father had designed just for my mother. Outside a gentle rain had begun to fall. I poured myself a cup of hot Earl Grey and watched the raindrops trail down the window. I thought about Jack, how he had entered, stayed, and then exited my life like a storm. Loud, chaotic, shaking everything I thought was solid. But after all, the rain always stops, and the trees bloom again, the house lights up, my mother smiles every morning. And I can finally sleep in peace. When spring returned and the maple trees around the estate began to bud, I knew it was time to write a new chapter in my life. The sorrow over my father had settled into memory, and the scars from Jack were beginning to heal. One early morning, as my mother and I sat at the wooden table under the grape arbor, sipping coffee and looking out at the backyard, she suddenly said, "Jaden, do you think we could turn this place into something special for others?" I looked at her a bit surprised, then realized what she meant. She wasn't talking about selling or sharing the house. She meant giving it a new purpose. I once heard my father say a beautiful house isn't just for admiring, it's for living, breathing with people. And now, as my life took a new turn, perhaps the estate needed a new purpose too, something beyond its material value or legacy. We started by clearing out the basement, which had previously just been storage. I turned it into a small event hall with classic stone walls, polished hardwood floors, and warm ambient lighting. The backyard was expanded into an outdoor wedding space, with a white wooden arch draped in vines and rows of lavender lining the path. My mother, who loved flower arranging, took on the role of event space designer. She named the project the Brooks Estate, a way to honor my father. We hired a team of young engineers to assess the home's structure, making sure everything met safety standards for hosting guests. A quiet reading room became a tea party area. The vintage ballroom on the second floor got a sound system upgrade for small piano performances. Word spread quickly through word of mouth. The first neighbor held their 30th wedding anniversary celebration there. Then a young couple from Oregon booked the Brooks Estate for an intimate wedding with just 40 guests. The awe in their eyes as they stepped through the gate, the applause beneath the wooden beams, the laughter echoing through the garden, it all made me feel I had done the right thing. And for the first time in a long while, I felt free. No more dry financial reports, no more endless Zoom calls, just bright, grateful faces and the simple joy of a perfect celebration. I also began writing again. Old journal entries, memories of my father, reflections from my failed marriage, not for publishing, but for healing. Strangely, the mansion, once filled with sorrow, was now a place of restoration. Each morning, my mother and I walked the vast grounds, baskets of fresh flowers in hand. We discussed decor ideas for the coming week, chose background music for upcoming weddings, or sometimes just sat by the koi pond, watching the fish glide beneath the clear water. Our mother-daughter relationship deepened more than ever. We were no longer just family under one roof. We were true partners, companions. One day, while reviewing the event booking log, my mother gently asked, "What do you think your father would say if he saw what we're doing now?" I smiled, my eyes turning toward the sunlight streaming through the window. "I believe he'd be proud, because we kept our promise, to keep this house alive in spirit." We didn't expand too quickly. We accepted no more than 3 events a month to ensure quality and attention to detail. Every staff member was someone we knew and trusted, carefully chosen not just for their skills, but for their heart. The estate was no longer a relic of a former life, but a launchpad for a new journey. I used to think loss was an ending, but it turned out to be a transition, one that helped me find a stronger, clearer version of myself. The Brooks Estate continued to host weddings, reunions, and even quiet celebrations for those on their own path to healing. And me? I remained behind the scenes, growing steadier and happier with each passing day. At the end of that summer, as the last lavender blooms in the garden began to fade, I received an unexpected email. The sender, Jack. The subject line read simply, "Thank you." It took me almost 10 minutes to open it. not because I was still angry or hurt, but because I wasn't sure I wanted to know anything more about him. But curiosity won. And I read. Jaden, I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I just need to say one thing. Thank you. Thank you for ending everything when you did. It forced me to look at myself and face things I never had the courage to admit. I got a job at a small career counseling center in Spokane. It's not flashy, but it's real. I help people who've been incarcerated or bankrupt find direction again. Maybe because I hit rock bottom too, I have the patience to really listen. I'm not asking for forgiveness. But I hope you know, the things you once believed in me weren't entirely wrong, I just wasn't mature enough to hold on to them. Wishing you all the strength you've always had. Jack. I closed the laptop and sat quietly by the second-floor window, where I could see the entire garden turning to autumn. The maple trees were starting to burn a brilliant red, the sunlight dancing gently across the rippling pond, and the breeze carried a soft scent of herbs through the air. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I just felt a lightness inside me, as if the last stone had finally been lifted after a long uphill climb. Knowing Jack was living a more honest life didn't make me want to return to the past, but it helped me believe that sometimes, fractures can be the beginning of rebirth, not just for me, but for him too. The last months of the year passed in joyful busyness at the Brooks estate. We hosted our first autumn wedding with a rustic theme, oak wood, golden candles, and hand-tied wildflower bouquets. The bride, a literature teacher from Portland, whispered to me as she was leaving. You didn't just give us a venue, you gave us a real beginning. I only smiled, but that sentence touched something deep within me. In the evenings I often sat with my mother on the back porch, holding a warm cup of tea, watching the twinkling garden lights my father had once installed by hand. He had designed the lighting to highlight every plant, every path. He didn't need to say anything. I could still feel him there, in the wind rustling the maples, in the soft glow over the pond, and in every decision I made with a sincere heart. The estate, my father's life's work, was no longer just a piece of property. It was proof of the power of family love, of resilience in the face of hardship, and of the belief that every crack can be where the light gets in. I once lost everything in the blink of an eye. Love, trust, even the image of myself in the mirror. But I found it all again in a different way. Not through someone else's promises, but through my own actions, choosing what was worth keeping and letting go of what wasn't. One early winter morning I stood on the second-floor balcony, the cold air brushing my face, looking down at the lawn where a couple was taking wedding photos. The bride in her white dress was laughing brightly, while the groom held her hand tightly, as if afraid the wind would carry her away. I rested my hand on the wooden railing, the fresh paint still faintly fragrant, and I understood. This was the end of an old journey, but also the beginning of hundreds of new ones, all starting from this place. The Brooks estate wasn't just a home preserving my father's legacy. It was a symbol of a woman's choice. A woman who once lost her way but found herself again, strong, independent, and no longer needing anyone else to define her worth. And I knew no matter what turns the future might hold, I would always remember one thing. No one can take anything from you unless you hand over your trust blindly. And sometimes, the only way to protect your most precious inheritance is to learn how to let go at the right time. From my own story, I've realized that loss isn't always the end, it can be the beginning of growth. I once loved, trusted the wrong person, and fell because of things I couldn't control. But it was those very fractures that taught me how to rise and rebuild a life with resilience and intentional choices. Happiness doesn't come from having someone by your side. It comes from knowing your own worth and never letting anyone else define it for you. What do you think about Jaden's journey and the choices she made? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to follow the channel so you won't miss the next meaningful and heartfelt stories about life and family.